So youth group, if you're a youth group child, young person, or if you're a parent, tonight we're inviting you to come in. We're going to feed you. Okay, we're going to have some tacos. They won't be as good as Eva's tacos, but they will be tacos. We're going to eat some tacos at 4:30 p.m. Youth group should still be here at 4 o'clock because you are going to help me to set things up, and you're going to help us to serve your parents. And we're going to talk to your parents and let them know what you've been doing for the last couple of months in youth group. And also, we're going to look at schedules to see if there is a time we can take that retreat. So 4:30, parents and youth group, hope you're there to have some tacos. But the fact is, conflicts do arise. They do arise, right? How many of you are married? Okay. Ever had conflict? Yeah, a little bit? A little bit? John, you're waving? You don't have to be married. How many of you are dating? Ever had a conflict? If you're not saying yes, you haven't dated long. And even if you're not dating, how many of you just have some good friends? Have some good friends. You ever have a conflict? Yeah, we know that that's part of humanity, is that we have some conflict because we are broken, sinful, selfish people. We don't have to like that, but it's true. We're broken, sinful, selfish people. And thus we sometimes find ourselves at odds with one another. But if we Christians are to be known for anything, we ought to be known for the way that we love God with all of our hearts, our souls, our mind, and our strength, and for the way that we love one another. In fact, you may recall that Jesus said, in John chapter 13, verse 35, it won't be on the screen, but Jesus said this. He said, "Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." The way that we love one another will show the world that we belong to Jesus and that we are his followers, his disciples. And a great part of how we love one another is how we forgive one another. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 tells us this. It says, "Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. And remember that the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others." And I think that's great because it's really practical. First of all, make allowance for each other's differences and faults. Okay, make allowances. I can look around this room right now, and I can tell there's a whole lot of differences and faults out there, as you can look up here and go, and likewise. Right? We've all got these differences. We don't agree on everything. We all have faults. We know that that's true. But we can look past those things in love for one another. And I think of it this way. You want to make it really practical? Every human being has made war against God. Every human being has made war against God. And we did it through our rebellion, through our sin. We have made war against God. But what did God do? Did he make war back against us? No, he made peace. He made peace, lasting, enduring peace at the cross of Jesus Christ. We made war, he made peace. And to that end, we Christians ought to be peaceable. We ought to be people who strive for peace. In Jesus' tremendous Sermon on the Mount, he said this. He said, "God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God." You can find that in Matthew chapter 5. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. And I know a lot of us right now are like, I know that. This is kind of a waste of 40 minutes so far. Worship is good, but really you're going to tell me I need to be peaceful? I already knew that. Well, we know what we ought to do, but let's just make this real. You don't have to raise your hand here, but I'm going to guess that some of us came in here today in conflict with somebody else. A brother, a sister, a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a coworker, a boss. I'm going to guess that some of us came in here today in conflict with somebody else. If you have your Bibles still open, please turn to Romans. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. those 4 Gospels up front, they tell us about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And then in Acts, we get a description of the church and how it operated. And then we get one of Paul's letters written to the church at Rome in Romans. And in Romans chapter 5, verses 17 through 18, we see this. Never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. And catch this part. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. You and I, as followers of Christ, have a responsibility to try to be peaceful, and where there is conflict, to try to resolve that conflict and make peace. But the world we live in is filled with conflict. Here's just a few examples. There's conflict between nations over trade, borders, immigration, all kinds of stuff. There's conflict between political parties to the point that the gridlock is such that no progress is being made at all. There's conflict between generations, those darn millennials. There's conflict between religions and churches. There's conflict between races, genders, labor and management, the rich and the poor. There's conflict between brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, parents and children. And we recognize those conflicts. In fact, one of the things that we're trying to do here at Grace to just help a little bit, is to have these parent empowerment meetings. Okay? And if you have a child who's here at Grace, or if you're just a parent, we want to let you know that on Sunday, May 7th, you can come to our parent empowerment meeting. Okay? After the worship service is over, we'll sing our final song. We'll walk downstairs to the youth room, and we'll spend a little while talking about raising our children to know, love, and serve Jesus. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what works and what doesn't, our own experiences, what the Bible says, and we're going to share those things. And we're doing that because we want to empower one another. We want to strengthen. We want to encourage one another. And I'll tell you what, I sure don't have all the answers. And so to go down there and hear from you, those of you who have been through some of it, are going through it now, or will go through it, it's really great. I appreciate that. And so all the parents are welcome to be a part of that. But there's definitely conflict, okay? And not just with our children, but all these places we have talked about. Now you might say, hey, listen, is conflict really a big deal? Is it really that big of a deal? Well, do you know that conflict hinders our fellowship with God? If you're asking that question, is conflict a big deal? Conflict hinders our fellowship with God. Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24 say this. So if you are presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice. You don't have to raise your hand on this one. Did any of you ever drive to church and you had a fight with your family in the car? Laughter probably means yes. Did any of you ever drive to church and you want to know who was that moron who parked his car in that spot on the line? That was Dave. More seriously, we're seeing here how serious it is that we love and forgive one another. Because when we come in to worship, and in this case to bring a sacrifice, but our sacrifice today is the sacrifice of worship. When we come in to make that sacrifice of worship to God, our hearts need to be clean. And one of the ways that our hearts can be clean is that we not only forgive others, but that we seek forgiveness where it is necessary. And so the scripture literally says, hey, don't even bother coming in here until you've reconciled those differences, or at least made the effort to reconcile those differences. And I know that next week somebody's going to remind me of that as the offering plate's being passed. They're going to say, oh, you know what? I just thought of something. Before I make my sacrifice, I have to go and reconcile something. But you may notice that it says, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. It does say that. Leave your sacrifice at the altar. Then go make peace. That's what it says. Here's the second piece. Conflict hinders our prayers. Conflict hinders our prayers. 1 Peter 3:7 speaks specifically to husbands. That particular verse speaks specifically to husbands. And it says, hey, listen, if you're not doing right by your wife, you're not leading her well and loving her and doing right by your wife, your prayers are hindered. Your prayers are hindered. And so when there is conflict, your prayers are hindered. And the last one is this, and I don't need a Bible verse for this one. Conflict hinders our happiness. I don't need a Bible verse for that, because you and I know that when we are in conflict with somebody, we're just not happy. When there's an unresolved conflict, there's a tension, there's something that doesn't sit well. We're not comfortable, and we're just not happy. Now, I know there's at least one or two people in the church today who are saying, no, wait a minute. I know some people, they enjoy conflict. I know some people that actually invite conflict, and they actually like to live inside that conflict. Okay? Don't turn and look at that person if they're next to you right now. I've known people who I might think that same thing about, but first of all, I can't judge their hearts. I don't know if they really like conflict, or maybe they just haven't learned skills to resolve it. But I do know this, that even if we could make that argument, even if we could make the argument that so-and-so, that one, they like conflict, I will bet you the one with whom they have conflict doesn't. The one with whom they have conflict doesn't. So conflict's not good for anyone. Not good for unresolved conflict. I should say that, unresolved conflict. There have been moments in history where we can see that certainly conflict has led to progress or the correction of injustice, but unresolved conflict is not good for anyone. So let's end today with some application. Rick Warren out at Saddleback Church, he gives a little bit of advice on how we can deal with conflict, how Christians ought to deal with conflict. But before I tell you what Rick said, Sean and I put our minds together this morning. We thought, well, what would we say? What would we say? And we thought that one of the things you can do if you want to resolve conflict in a Christian way is talk about that person behind their back. Talk about that person behind their back. In fact, you know where the best place to have that conversation is? Right out there in the hall. Right out there in the hall before or after service. Obviously, that's foolish. We thought another thing you might do is you might use social media as a tool to let the world know just how awful that person is. And Sean reminded me that it's best, it's actually more effective, if you don't use the person's specific name, if you just give generalizations, like that lady who sits in the third seat of the third row on the left side of the church. He said that's a good way to do it. Obviously, those things are foolish. Those things are foolish. But I will ask you to raise your hand on this one. Has anyone ever resorted to some foolish means by which to resolve conflict? Ever? Yeah, ever, right? Again, I'm like, some of you don't have hands. Literally, some of you don't have hands, I think. Yeah. Well, here's some real advice. Here's some real advice. And again, borrowing from Rick Warren. First thing he says is this. He says, you know what? Where there's conflict, take initiative. Take initiative. Where there's conflict and you know about it, and there may be some times when you don't realize that there's conflict. And you know why you don't realize it? Because the other person didn't take the initiative to let you know. But where you know there is conflict, take the initiative. Take the initiative. Go to that person. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus says, if you have conflict with a brother, if your brother has sinned against you, go to him or go to her and deal with it with your brother or sister. And so we take initiative. We don't let it linger. We don't sit around and wait and hope that that person will come to us. We take the initiative and we go. There's a great book out on my shelf in my office. I got it a couple years ago at a leadership conference at Willow Creek Church. And the book is called What Conversation Am I Not Having? And it's a fantastic question to ask, and it's a really good read. What conversation am I not having? Because oftentimes we skirt around the real issues. We don't talk about the things that need to be addressed. And so one, take initiative. Number two, here's what Warren says. He says, confess my part. Confess my part in this conflict. Because chances are you have played some role in the conflict that exists between you. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 34, we see this, that God opposes the proud and he gives grace to the humble. Brothers and sisters in Christ, let's be humble. Where there is conflict, let us consider our part. What have I done? Or what have I said? How have I contributed to this brokenness? Is there something I said that was hurtful? Is there something I did that was misunderstood? But what is the role that I play in conflict? And here's one of the big challenges. When there is conflict, how do most people, actually, who do most people address first? In conflict, who do most people address first? The other guy. The other guy. I mean, you know why there's conflict. Because she said this or he did that. And so I think it's good advice. Confess my part. What have I done first to contribute to this conflict? By the way, there are 7 of these. We're on number 3. Number 3, listen for the hurt. Listen for the hurt. And so as you talk to that person, because you have taken the initiative, you have recognized that there's conflict, and you have thought about what role you play in it, and now you're opening up a conversation. James says it this way. In James chapter 4, he said, James 1, he says this. He says, be quick to what? Listen, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Okay, so be quick to listen, be slow to speak, and be slow to get angry. Listen. And so we go to that person because we're taking initiative. We say, listen, there's a conflict here. I recognize that there's a conflict. I'm feeling it. I don't know if you are, but there's definitely a conflict here. Or it might be, I've recognized that you're feeling something, and let's deal with this. Okay? And you've thought about what role you might play. Now listen. Listen to what that person has to say, because the conflict may not be the thing that you think it is. A lot of times in counseling people, they have a conversation, a husband or a wife or a mother and a son or whatever it is. One sits on the couch on this side and one sits on the couch on that side, and they have a conversation together, and before long the voices are raising and they're being ugly with one another. And one party will say to the other, well, you just said, and I have to step in and say, guys, hold on. That is not what he said. That is not what just happened. And we have to go back and pay attention again, because sometimes our perspective is off, and so we have to listen for the hurt. What is it specifically that is causing this conflict? Where are you hurt? Because I can't know how to try to apologize or reconcile until I know where the brokenness lies. Number four, consider their perspective. Consider their perspective. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 says this, don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. Consider that other person's perspective. How is it that maybe they saw it this way? Or how is it that they felt this way when I really intended for that? Consider that person's perspective and how they arrived at a position of hurt and where that conflict is. So we take initiative. We confess our own part. We listen for the hurt. We consider the other person's perspective, and by golly, I struggle with that one. I do. I struggle with the other person's perspective. You know why? Because I'm about as selfish as they come. I see the world through my eyes. I hear what you say through my ears. And I process everything through my mind and my heart. And it's all based on Rick. Okay, now there are some times when, by God's grace, I can do better. But most often, at least my default, my natural position is to be very selfish. And so to consider your perspective. Where's this coming from? Number 5, tell the truth tactfully. Tell the truth. And I've heard too many Christians who say, well, you know what, I got to be honest. God wants me to be honest. And then, wham! They drop an atomic bomb. Okay, we can tell the truth, and we ought to tell the truth. In fact, we're not going to get to conflict resolution if we don't actually tell the truth. There has to be honesty. But brothers and sisters, you and I know that we can be honest, and we can do it tactfully. We can do it in love. Ephesians chapter 4 tells us, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. We can tell the truth, and we can bear our honest, raw feelings, but we can do that in a kind and respectful way. Number 6, fix the problem instead of fixing blame. Fix the problem instead of fixing blame. I've heard it said this way. I don't recall where it came from, but I've heard it said this way. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? You want to be right, or you want to be happy? And oftentimes in relationships, that's what it really comes down to. You know, we could fix this thing. We could probably move on, and we could both be happy. But before we do, can you just acknowledge that I'm right? You don't even have to acknowledge that I'm right. That's very selfish of me. Can you just acknowledge that you were wrong? And so often, we are concerned with blame. Blame. When in fact, what we ought to be concerned with is finding a solution so that there can be peace, so that there can be forgiveness, restoration, redemption, reconciliation. And so we try to fix the problem instead of fixing blame. Worship team, why don't you guys come up as we finish here. Number 7. Number 7 is this. Focus on reconciliation. Focus on reconciliation. Our efforts need to be such that we can get back to brotherhood, because that is what Christians are supposed to be. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, the world will know you by the way that you love one another. We have to love one another, and it's hard to love one another when we're in conflict. It's hard to love one another when we are at odds with one another, when there hasn't been forgiveness for brokenness. And so we work toward reconciliation, not just for the sake of reconciliation, but we work toward it so that we can be back to brotherhood and sisterhood, and so that we can honor Christ. And here's the biggest reason of all for me. Because church, you and I are the church. We are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. And if the church goes dark, which by the way I don't believe it can, at least not the Big C church, that church won't go dark. But this one could, or the one down the street could. If the church goes dark, then the light doesn't shine. And we are the light of the world. The way that we deal with one another is so important. It's so important for others to see that we can love and we can forgive. And we are the light of the world. I like this quote. It took me a minute to process it. When you hear it said, it makes more sense, but when you read it, it's a little tougher. The quote is this: hurt people hurt people. You ever hear that before? I never did. I just read that this week. And again, when I read